What if Russell Crowe's character Maximus, who died at the end of Gladiator, returned for the sequel? Well, he almost did, in a version of Gladiator 2 that featured the underworld, Roman gods, and even Maximus journeying through time, fighting in several wars throughout history. So let's dive in and take a look behind the scenes to find out why it was never made, and also discover what could have been Gladiator 2. When DreamWorks approached Ridley Scott about directing Gladiator, he immediately signed on after seeing a copy of Jean-Léon Gérôme's 1872 painting Pollice Verso, which Scott said portrays the Roman Empire in all its glory and wickedness. However, when DreamWorks pointed out that Scott hadn't read the script nor knew anything about the story, Scott replied, "I don't care, I'll do it." However, after reading the script, Scott realized it needed work, a sentiment shared by his eventual leading man. And while Mel Gibson was the first choice to play Maximus, he turned it down as he felt he was too old. Russell Crowe would then emerge as the top choice to play the character, following his breakout performance in LA Confidential. But when he read the Gladiator script, similar to Ridley, he hated it. In it, there were whole sequences explaining the differences between chariots by comparing them to modern-day sports cars like Ferraris and Maseratis, as well as the gladiators taking endorsements from olive oil companies. And while the latter did happen historically, Crowe felt nobody would believe it. However, Crowe was attracted to playing a Roman general, and more importantly, working with director Ridley Scott, who promised Crowe that they wouldn't shoot anything on the page he didn't like, leading to the two of them to cut the script down to a mere 21 pages, throwing out the rest. Now, keep in mind, a 2-hour movie is 120 pages, giving them a lot of rewriting to do, which would not only come from improvisation on set, but writers John Logan and William Nicholson, who developed the afterlife plot thread that would open a gateway to a potential sequel. According to Nicholson, Crowe called his new dialogue garbage, but told him that he could make it sound good because he was the greatest actor in the world. Of course, the dialogue in question was Maximus's famous speech, where he reveals himself to Commodus and says in this life or the next he'll have his vengeance, which Crowe at one point allegedly even refused to say, preferring to improvise instead. But when he was unable to ad-lib anything better, he read the speech as written. In fact, Crowe and Ridley Scott improvised much of the movie, starting with the very first scene they shot. As 400 extras waited to film the opening battle in Germania, Ridley, perhaps to ease Crowe's nerves, captured an intimate moment where he asked Crowe to ponder a bird in a tree, instructing him to watch the bird fly away before shifting his focus back to the battlefield. In another example, while Maximus gives an after-battle prayer, Crowe picks up 2 random figurines on the shelf, which were placed by the art department, and directs a prayer towards them as if they were his wife and child, with Cicero, played by Tommy Flanagan, in the adjoining room. After shooting the scene, Ridley wanted to somehow bring back the figurines, as well as Cicero, who was only meant to be there for 1 day of work, resulting in the actor being on set for months with no idea what he was going to do, apart from Ridley intending to somehow come back to his character and those figurines, which Ridley would eventually work into the story. Crowe also improvised part of the scene where Maximus describes his home to Marcus Aurelius. Rather than detailing a fictional location, Crowe drew inspiration from personal experience, describing his home in Australia. Even Maximus's motto, "Strength and Honor," was thought up by Crowe, and inspired by his high school motto. Frankly, it's amazing the film turned out so good considering how much of it was made up on the fly. After its release, the film catapulted Russell Crowe to superstardom, revitalized Ridley Scott's career, and won 5 Oscars, including Best Picture, leading to inevitable discussions about a sequel. However, there was one major problem. Russell Crowe's character Maximus dies at the end of the movie. And while you'd assume this would kill any possibility of a sequel, for all involved it turned out to be nothing more than a minor detail, as the creative team quickly began pitching ideas for how to get around it. DreamWorks, who produced the first film, favored a proper sequel that didn't include Crowe, since the character was dead. John Logan, who contributed rewrites to the first film, would be hired to pen it. And this version of the film would have taken place 15 years later, and would see the Praetorian Guards ruling Rome, which is now a corrupt fascist state headed towards its own demise. Lucius obviously would have been older too, and the last heir of Marcus Aurelius. The story would primarily center around Lucius learning that he's the secret son of Maximus. However, Crowe still wanted to be a part of the film, leading the story to evolve to become neither a prequel nor a sequel, as the script would go backwards and forwards in time, with parallel storylines similar to the multi-generational drama The Godfather Part 2, showing both the father Maximus and his son Lucius years apart. And while Ridley Scott expressed interest, he also found the story far too rambling and complex, attributing the first film's success to simplicity, as Maximus goes on a revenge mission to avenge his family's murder, as he tries to stay alive in the Colosseum long enough to eventually kill Commodus. Scott would also note how the project would have to be retitled, as it had little to do with gladiators. Eventually, Scott and Russell Crowe began talking about commissioning their own version of the sequel, unsatisfied with the studio's version, as Crowe was interested in resurrecting Maximus due to the Romans' great belief in the afterlife, and began researching Roman beliefs to accomplish this. To write it, Crowe turned to his friend, the incredibly talented and and innovative musician Nick Cave. If you're unfamiliar with Nick Cave, understanding a bit about him is crucial to appreciating his eventual bonkers script for Gladiator 2. For example, as Cave began planning the music video to his single Bring It On, he asked MTV why they wouldn't play his videos, to which they replied, because they're not commercial enough. When Cave asked what would be commercial, he was told scantily clad women shaking their butts, which resulted in Cave making a video featuring exactly that. And speaking of music videos, there's also the one for Heathen Child, which sees him dance around in Centaurian garb and shoot a nuclear fireball out of his ass. And while Cave is a published author, his experience with screenwriting was limited to just one screenplay, the Australian western called The Proposition, which is why he was taken aback when Russell Crowe approached him to write Gladiator 2. However, Crowe saw in Cave's bold creativity the potential to ingeniously resolve the challenge of Maximus being dead. In fact, when Crowe asked Cave to write the script, Cave said, "But Russell, didn't you die in Gladiator?" To which Crowe simply replied, "Yeah, you sort that out." Cave's Gladiator 2 screenplay opens with Maximus waking up in the afterlife, only to find it's not the sun-kissed Elysium he dreamt of in Gladiator, but instead a dark, perpetually raining underworld inhabited by thieves and sinners. Guided by Mordecai, a ghost who comes and goes and only Maximus can see and hear, Maximus journeys to a ruined temple, where he meets the gods, who look like dying old men. Maximus asks to be reunited with his family in Elysium, but the gods explain that one of their own, Hephaestus, betrayed them and is now preaching the gospel of another god, who's more powerful than all of them, slowly eroding their influence. As a result, they offer Maximus a deal: find Hephaestus and kill him, and they'll reunite him with his wife and son. However, after agreeing to the deal, Maximus learns from the ghost Mordecai that he's not the only one who made a deal with the gods. His wife sacrificed her place in Elysium so that her son could live out the rest of his life on Earth. Maximus then travels across the barren desert to find Hephaestus. Once he reaches him, Hephaestus warns Maximus that his son is in trouble, before Maximus awakens in Lyon years after his death, amidst a massacre orchestrated by Roman legionnaires. Maximus attempts to fight them off, but is captured as he comes face to face with Lucius, Commodus's nephew who has grown up to be just as evil as his uncle. Lucius orders Maximus's execution, but Maximus fights off the Romans and escapes to Rome in search of his son, Marius. Along the way, Mordecai informs Maximus that he's angered the gods by not killing Hephaestus, and is now banished from ever returning to the afterlife. And while Maximus brushes this off, we'll come back to this in a bit, as it becomes pretty important later on. Maximus eventually finds his son, Marius, only to discover that Marius doesn't recognize him and has become a devout Christian. However, Maximus fears for his son's life due to Rome's harsh persecution of Christians. At one point, we even get a glimpse of the Colosseum, which is flooded as Christians are brutally killed in mock naval combat. Eventually, Maximus reunites with his old friend Juba and begins to train his son and other Christians in secret outside the city to fight back against the Romans as word spreads that the great gladiator, Maximus Decimus Meridius, has returned from the dead. Lucius, eager to avenge his uncle's death and crush the Christian resistance, leads an army to the Christian camp outside of the city, where a climactic battle ensues, resulting in the Christians defeating the Romans and Lucius dying at the hands of Marius, who comes to regret his actions, feeling he strayed from his faith by fearing death and choosing armed conflict over peaceful resistance. The film ends with a montage of Maximus fighting in all of the wars throughout history, as we see him fight in the Crusades, World War II, and Vietnam, in a sequence similar to the opening montage of X-Men Origins Wolverine. The final scene features Maximus working at the Pentagon, cursed to live forever as an eternal warrior. So what went wrong? After Crowe read the script, which was called Gladiator 2 Christ Killer, Cave asked him what he thought, to which Crowe replied, "Don't like it, mate." And while you'd think that would be the nail in the coffin, Ridley actually liked it. However, DreamWorks felt Cave's script was too far-fetched, and not in keeping with the spirit and theme of the original film, preferring their more grounded take on the sequel written by John Logan. Unable to come to terms on the direction of the sequel, a Gladiator 2 starring Russell Crowe would languish in development hell for years, until Russell Crowe would eventually age out of the role. For his part, Cave said he enjoyed writing it because he knew on every level that it was never going to get made, and he was right. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Bullets and Blockbusters for more great content.